Most people spend 35 years planning the financial side of retirement and almost 0 hours planning the psychological side. Here are the 5 things that quietly vanish the day you stop working, why they hit harder than anyone warns you, and what the people who actually navigate retirement well do differently. The first thing that disappears is your daily structure. And I don't mean your calendar gets lighter. I mean the entire invisible scaffolding that held your days together for 3.5 decades collapses overnight. Think of it like this. For 35 years, your schedule was a load-bearing wall. Meetings, deadlines, commutes, projects. You complained about all of it. Then retirement comes and someone knocks that wall out. Suddenly, the ceiling sags. Most retirees describe the first few months as disorienting in a way they genuinely did not expect. They thought freedom from structure was the goal. What they discovered is that structure was actually the thing making freedom feel meaningful. Without it, choices multiply and paralysis sets in. A guy I know retired at 63 after a long career in operations management. He told me that by week 3, he was standing in his kitchen at 11 in the morning with absolutely no idea what to do next. Not because he lacked hobbies or money, because for the first time in his adult life, nobody needed anything from him at a specific time. The research on this is uncomfortable. Studies on retirees show that unstructured time, beyond a certain threshold, correlates with declining cognitive engagement and rising rates of depression in the first year post-retirement. The people who come out of this phase fast are the ones who build a new structure immediately, not the same structure as work, but a deliberate one. Specific times for specific activities, commitment to other people that creates accountability. Routines that exist not because a job requires them, but because you designed them to support the life you actually want. The structure doesn't disappear permanently unless you let it. The second thing that disappears is the social network you thought was yours. This one is harder to admit. A large portion of the relationships most people carry into retirement were built entirely on proximity and shared context. The people you ate lunch with, vented to in the hallway, texted about work problems. When the shared context disappears, so does most of the relationship. And it doesn't happen dramatically. Nobody falls out, nobody has a conflict. It just goes quiet. You stop getting the group chat messages, the lunch invitations dry up. And if you're still in contact, you notice pretty quickly that without work as a topic, the conversation runs thin in about 8 minutes. This is not a personal failure. It's a structural reality. A man I know retired from a firm where he had worked for 28 years. He described his post-retirement social circle as feeling like he was at the center of a web, with suddenly being a loose thread with nothing attached to it. The practical implication here is that retirement requires deliberate social rebuilding, not passive maintenance. The people who adapt fastest are the ones who identify which relationships have depth beyond the job and invest heavily in those, while simultaneously building new connections in the communities they want to belong to going forward. Waiting for old colleagues to stay in touch while your schedule empties is not a strategy. It's how you end up isolated. The third thing that disappears is your ambition drive. And this surprises almost everyone. Most people assume they will feel relieved to let go of professional ambition. What they don't anticipate is the absence of the forward momentum that ambition provided. Your brain is wired to find satisfaction in progress, not in the work itself, but in the sensation of moving toward something. When a person retires without replacing that target, the engine stays on, but the car goes nowhere. It idles, and an idling engine eventually develops problems. A retired executive I heard about described it as having all the fuel but no road. He had resources, time, health. What he didn't have was a direction that felt worth driving toward. The retirees who avoid this pit don't suppress ambition, they redirect it. They pick something with measurable progress, a physical goal, a craft with a skill curve, a project with an endpoint. It doesn't need to be impressive to anyone else. It just needs to engage the same neurological reward system that work used to feed. The goal is not to stay busy. The goal is to stay in motion towards something that generates genuine satisfaction when you make progress on it.
The fourth thing that disappears is the baseline of urgency that governed your entire working life. And here is where most retirement advice gets it completely backwards. People are told to celebrate the loss of urgency. And in theory, that's right. The pressure of deadlines, performance reviews, and perpetual productivity demands was genuinely exhausting. But urgency also has a hidden function. It creates rhythm. It tells you what matters right now. When urgency evaporates, the days can start to feel frictionless in a way that sounds appealing but is actually disorienting. Without any time pressure, hours expand and collapse in unpredictable ways. Weeks disappear. A man who retired at 61 told me he looked up one day and realized 6 months had passed and he essentially had no memory of how he spent it. Not because he was doing nothing, because nothing had a timestamp on it. The fix is not to manufacture fake urgency, it's to install intentional rhythm. Commitments that create natural time pressure, weekly obligations, seasonal goals, deadlines you set for yourself or that come from involvement in something larger than your own schedule. The people who thrive in retirement are not the ones who escape all urgency, they're the ones who learn to generate it internally.
The fifth thing that disappears, and this is the one that hits hardest for most people, is your professional identity. For the majority of working adults, the answer to the question of who are you is inseparable from what you do. Doctor, engineer, manager, teacher, these are not just job titles. They're the primary framework through which most people understand their own value and their place in the world. When the title disappears, so does the framework. And without a framework, the question of who you actually are becomes genuinely destabilizing for many retirees. This is not a small thing. It's not something you work through in a weekend. It's a years-long process of constructing a new answer to a question most people have never had to seriously ask. A man who had practiced medicine for 32 years described his first year post-retirement as an identity vacuum. He was no longer a doctor, but he had not yet figured out what he was instead. The transition demanded that he locate his sense of worth in something other than professional competence and status, and that work turned out to be harder than any clinical challenge he had ever faced. The retirees who navigate this best tend to have already developed a layered sense of self before they leave work. They've invested in relationships, interests, contributions, and community roles that exist independently of the job title. When the title goes, they still have a rich answer to the question of who they are. The ones who struggle are the ones who put everything into the professional identity and left nothing in reserve. If you are reading this before you retire, that is the preparation that actually matters. Build an identity that can survive the loss of your job title, because that title will eventually go, and what remains is who you actually are. These 5 disappearances are not failures, they are transitions. The retirees who come through them well are not the ones who avoided the losses. They are the ones who saw them coming and built accordingly. They replaced structure deliberately, rebuilt social networks intentionally, redirected ambition towards something real, installed new sources of rhythm, and developed an identity deep enough to outlast any job title. Retirement does not automatically become the best chapter. It becomes the best chapter for the people who treat it like one, requires planning and maintenance, not just a date on a calendar.